King Salman has only been in office for 8 months, but that hasn't stopped critics from challenging his human rights record and his commitment to reform. According to Human Rights Watch, executions are on the rise, pro-reform activists and peaceful dissidents are repressed, and discrimination continues against women and religious minorities. And while the late Saudi King Abdullah walked a fine line between reform and his country's ultra-conservative clerics, King Salman's path is far less certain. Later, we'll talk with a Saudi scholar and an advocate for women's rights. But first, joining us from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where he teaches at Prince Sultan College, is journalist Khaled Batarfi. Khaled, thanks for joining us.
You're most welcome.
I just cited that Human Rights Watch report there that says that Saudi Arabia continues to execute people in record numbers, represses pro-reform activists, has failed to take steps to protect foreign workers, and maintains discrimination against women. These are serious accusations. Does this sound like a government that is committed to reform under the new king?
Well, as you say, they are accusations. They have to prove it before they become true. And I believe most of these accusations are not accurate. I don't know the source of their information, but I know, for example, there's no rise in execution in Saudi Arabia, and women rights are and now is getting more rise actually, because they are running for office and they are also electing. In the past, they were not able to elect or run for office in municipal elections. So I could see that the movement is going forward, and there is no return back for reforms in Saudi Arabia.
Well, some of that information comes from the Saudi government itself. For instance, the number of people executed comes from Saudi Arabia itself. You mentioned women's rights, though, and there appears to be some progress. Most recently, as you pointed out, with women being able to vote and being able to run in municipal elections. But what kind of real power is there? I mean, are these advisory bodies, or will they be able to exercise power?
Well, actually, this time around, they are getting more power, and they are authorized to review all projects and all issues related to cities and towns, complaints from the people, and they could call for any official who fails his duties to come and explain him or herself. And they could also review the budget and see if there is irregularities or anything that's raised doubts.
There has been a great deal written about these reforms. One of the things we have seen is that there's been opposition to these reforms coming from the religious leadership in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, of course, follows a very strict interpretation of Islam known as Wahhabism. Religious leaders are not happy with those reforms. Can these two forces, on the one hand, religion, on the other hand, reform, live with each other in Saudi Arabia?
When you say leadership, you mean the High Council of Ulama, and the Supreme Council approved of these reforms, and they never came out against it. But if you mean some religious people, scholars or individuals who have opinion, they always had opinion. It's never been agreed from all parts of society. There are still conservative parts who thinks that women should not mingle in public with men, and they should be given duties related to family and so on. And that was in the past, that was today, and maybe in the future. And that's in every religion, not just in Saudi Arabia, not just for Islam. And I think reforms will continue as progress, because the movement of history cannot return back for any reason or for any group.
Right, put this in some kind of context for us, this movement towards reform. I mean, there are reforms, but you still have things like the male guardianship system for women. It forbids women from obtaining passports, marrying, traveling, or accessing higher education without the approval of a male guardian. I mean, do you feel optimistic? Is there a feeling on your part that these restrictions could be removed at some point?
Of course, I'm one of the people who's calling for this restriction, or some of it at least, to be removed. There are some restrictions that's not just for female but also for males. For kids under 18, they have to get permission from their parents to travel, for example. But after 18, it's only for female, and that's why I believe that this has to be reviewed. Of course, there is different interpretation of Islam in this regard, and some would say that's Islamic, some would say no, that's a wrong interpretation of what Islam says about it. So this discussion will continue, but any reforms has to go through these discussions because it is a very conservative and religious society. And when society decides that it's time to change this interpretation, or that time has changed and we have to change with it, then things will happen.
And for some reason, another restriction on women in Saudi Arabia, which has got a great deal of media attention in other parts of the world, is the ban on women driving. Why is there a ban on women driving?
It's amazing because, you know, in Bedouin, in the desert, women drive. It's just in the cities. And of course, they cannot explain that because of Islam forbidding that, because women at the time of the Prophet, they rode camels and horses, and they were not restricted. But they are saying that time is different today, and it's for the protection of women. So men will not harass them. And what if they drive at night and they are in a remote area? What could happen to them? And so it's not religious. It's something social. It's feeling that you are like the parents of all women in society, and you could decide for them what's good and what's bad. And I am one of the people who are against this. I think parents who are, and women themselves, should decide for themselves what's risky and what's not. And I believe driving is not risky.
And let's look, you know, at the broader question of human rights in Saudi Arabia. I mean, it continues its ban on public practices of all religions other than Islam. And when we look at some of the dissident views that have been expressed in Saudi Arabia, we have a Saudi writer and journalist, Raif Badawi, and this was a case that also received a lot of publicity around the world. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, 1,000 lashes, for, quote, insulting Islam through religious channels. And Human Rights Watch says there's systematic discrimination against those who follow the Shia branch of Islam. Do you see a time when there'll be more religious tolerance in Saudi Arabia?
Well, King Salman, in his speech, the first speech, said there will not be any discrimination allowed because all citizens are equal, women and men, and follower of all religious sects, and from all regions and background and races are equal. And we will fight any discrimination. Of course, there is some social, some of the society groups or people who are not convinced that all people are created equal. And that's in every society. You find these people. But when the law is in your side, I encourage everyone who receive any maltreatment or any harassment or any racial or sexual harassment to go and claim their rights like this journalist did and got what he asked for.
You know, we're talking about social issues in Saudi Arabia. There are, of course, other challenges that the country faces, notably the future of its economy. According to The Economist magazine, the United States has displaced Saudi Arabia right now as the world's biggest oil producer. And as the price falls, and as Saudi Arabia, of course, tries to retain its share of the market, this is putting high-cost producers out of business. I mean, you add to that the fact that you have a very difficult war that is taking place right next door in Yemen, where Saudi Arabia is taking on Houthi forces in that country. What does it look like from Saudi Arabia when this country is faced with those kinds of challenges? Does that part of Saudi Arabia need more reforms as well?
No, it's Saudi's fate to have these challenges every now and then. Remember Saddam, remember Khomeini, remember al-Assad, remember in Yemen itself, Nasser. So if you go back to the recent history, you will find many challenges. Recently, in the 80s, we have a recession, huge recession, when the price of the oil for each oil barrel went less than $10 a barrel, and there was huge recession at that time. So I think Saudi Arabia have a wise leadership that will lead it out of this dilemma and this troubles, this troubling waters, like we always did in the past. I'm not pessimistic. I'm optimistic, and I believe if we could get out of Yemen winners, that will help us lead the way, the Arabs, to get rid of the Iranian interventions in our affairs, and that will solve at least half our problems.